So is it possible to blend 2 layers of paint together in a matter of seconds? Yes, but there's actually a pretty important skill you need to have to do this properly. And the better you are at this, the faster and more contrasted your blends will be. So in this video, I'm gonna show you how to use feathering to blend 2 layers fast, explain what is the skill that's gonna allow you to unlock its full power, and how all this will up your miniature painting game. But first, we need to ask, what's feathering and how do you do it? Feathering is the technique that consists in applying a layer of paint, usually on the thicker side, base coat consistency. Rinse your brush and quickly drag the paint around to blend it with the other previous layer, creating a transition between the two. And all this thanks to that transparency quality of the paint. If you need a little consistency guide, please download it for free down below. Some painters use 2 brushes. One, they apply the paint, and with the other one, they drag the paint around. Method I never found it comfortable, to be honest. Painting with 2 brushes in hand can be quite uncomfortable, and with the time that you actually pick back up the other brush, you can just rinse it in water. Good news is that this technique is incredibly scalable, right? Which means it can be both hard and easy, depending on how you do it. The easier version is gonna be, of course, more beginner friendly. It's also gonna take a little bit more time to have that visual impact and to be built up. Jeez, you have so much fur. The harder one, it's gonna have It's gonna have higher visual impact and contrast, but you're gonna need more of that skill that I talked about in the beginning. But before I tell you what the skill is, let me show you real quick the other factor that makes it easy or hard to use the feathering technique. Let's start by comparing this red elder to this orange one. First, I base coated both of them respectively with Corn Red and Deep Brown by AK Interactive. I started highlighting them by using just a lighter color, Mephiston Red and light orange. I apply the color, rinse my brush, and then drag the paint near the edge of the still wet layer. The process is the same for both models, but there's a big difference between the two. Before I tell you what it is, you need to remember that acrylic paint is gonna look a little bit different when you first apply compared when it dries. When acrylic paint is wet, it's gonna appear more bright and saturated, when really it's not. And that's important to take into account. And it's directly linked to the difference between the red and orange elder. When I apply Mephiston on the Corn Red, even though it seems much brighter when it's wet, it's actually not. It's actually very kinda pretty close to the Corn Red. This means that when I feather this out, I won't have to put so much effort or focus or concentration into dragging the paint. On the other hand, in the orange one, the jump is bigger and you will need to be more careful in order to avoid leaving holes or stuff like that. The cool thing is, I can achieve an equally good result with both levels of feathering. With the first one, it's just gonna take a little bit longer, but look at him. It kind of looks pretty cool, yeah? Another factor you'll need to be considering is how big is the surface. The bigger the surface, the harder it's gonna be. But more on that later. So it all goes down to the colors that you choose. But how do you know if you're ready to pick a higher value jump? Well, it's all about that one skill. Let me explain. In my last 2 newsletters, I talked about the pillars of miniature painting and how you need to learn this if you really want to start improving. As a beginner, the first thing that I have been taught is how to apply paint to a model. And then moving on probably to something like edge highlights, which in terms is just painting lines with your brush and positioning the brush in the right way to take advantage of the angles and borders and edges and stuff like that, right? There's a third thing you need to learn that's actually gonna unlock a bunch of other things, and you can practice these skills by using feathering. Moving the paint around on the model is the hardest brush skills to learn, sometimes even harder than painting very small lines. When the value jump is low, like in the first red elder I painted, the dragging motion is very minimal. On the contrary, on the orange and blue ones, the movements need to be more precise and thought out. There are 3 different types of motion you can use to move the paint around while feathering, or in general, really. Number 1, you can use a zigzag motion. Number 2, you can push the paint upwards in the wet layer. Number 3, you can use the whole length of your brush to feather. Most people are going to use the zigzag motion because it's the easier way to do it and the easy to learn. But at some point, I think it's worth trying out some new brushstroke types. At the end of the day, you're gonna choose the brushstroke depending on what you're painting, how big the surface is, how much of a value jump you have, and yada yada yada. It kind of makes sense that bigger areas are harder to blend because we're working with wet paint, and the more area you have to cover, the sooner some parts will dry and it'll become messy. It's when you start moving the paint around on your model that you start to run the risk getting ugly effects like chalkiness on your miniatures. That's why it's so important to practice intentionally, maybe even outside of your model, just embracing the fact that you can only improve by making mistakes as well, so just do it. Well, yeah. This is how feathering is gonna actually make you a better painter, because then you can bring on these new brush skills to other techniques, incorporating them and building up your own style and your own way to paint your miniatures. My absolute favorite way to use feathering is just to sketch out my highlights, feathering out the edges. But where do you actually place these highlights? Well, luckily for you, I have a video for it where I go through everything you need to learn to place your highlights on your models. I'll see you there, or you'll see me past me there, I guess. I don't know.